Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining for one of the last sessions today. We are here to talk about how to increase public benefit access for adult learners. It really is a college access and completion strategy. I'm Kate Kinder. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a state strategies director at National Skills Coalition. And if you aren't familiar with National Skills Coalition, we are a DC-based nonprofit that advocates for more inclusive skills training policies, access to better jobs, and really for a more inclusive and racially equitable economy and society. And prior to that, a little bit background of how I come at this work is I worked at Portland Community College in Oregon for close to 18 years, most recently as a dean. In a lot of different roles, but really focused on increasing access to college, to short-term stackable credentials, and had the opportunity to lead a number of statewide efforts amongst the community colleges focused specifically on public benefit access, on partnerships, and really that as a strategy to increase access to college. So including the Community College SNAP ENT consortium in Oregon. So one of the things before we dive into going over benefit access and what some of those public benefits are is I really want to set a little bit of context and really have us think of this work as systemic and policy solutions versus individual fixes. And so when you think of public benefit access and getting students connected to resources, we certainly are wanting to scale those best practices that faculty, that career coaches, that navigators, that community-based organizations are doing one-on-one with individuals to transform their lives, but really to achieve equity and to make it systemic, we want to focus on the policy solutions of that work. And so thinking, how can we take what's been working on an individual level, frequently in spite of the system, and make that the system to increase connections to college, those career pathways, holistic support, and financial assistance. So it's focused on the individual, but really looking at solutions at scale and how to transform and reimagine our systems and how we serve students. For a little bit of context setting, this has been threaded throughout, but I think it's really important to think about these national opportunity gaps that are really striking. So over 60 million Americans, 25 and older, were without post-secondary credentials in 2021. As Dr. Stout referenced this morning, there's over 40 million Americans who attended college but left without a credential or degree, and 24.2 million Americans 25 and older who are without a high school equivalency. And what I really want to underscore and has been lifted up throughout this event today is that it's not for lack of talent, it's not for lack of effort, it's not for lack of interest, it's really a lack of opportunity in our systems to support the access to college, especially for adults. And one of the main reasons, despite some of the narrative that gets thrown out there that, adults are questioning the value of college education, as was also lifted up this morning, really, if you ask adults and you ask potential students, they see the value in post-secondary credentials, particularly in community colleges and those certificates and degrees that connect directly to jobs. And so when you start looking at the root causes, it's really looking at these resource gaps. And so the Hope Center has done a lot of research. I'm sure many of your colleges and states have participated in these surveys, but really looking at the experiences of community colleges students, and have found that nearly 6 in 10 students experience some form of basic needs and security in the prior year. And so whether that's food insecurity, housing insecurity, or homelessness, I think it's a really staggering statistic and really important to recognize and understand the needs of today's students and what's getting in the way of college access and completion. When you then look at those who are not in college, there's also, or who are in college and struggling with basic needs and security, there's 41.2 million Americans, or 12% of the population, who access SNAP benefits, which is Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or food stamps, formerly known as some students refer to it as EBT. And 41% of those were in working families. And so you look at the costs of attendance well beyond tuition and fees, in the things like housing and food and childcare, cost continues to be lifted up as one of the top reasons from adults of why they're not enrolling in college or completing college. And I'm sure that's very familiar to all of you who are working directly with students, but I think it's really important to continue to share that data to really lift up both the experience working at the colleges in the classroom, but also really make sure that policymakers and decision makers understand what the obstacles are so we can reimagine a better system for our students. And so one of the things I wanted to share is really a perspective of a community college, a former community college president, PCC, President Mark Mitsui, who worked in Washington and a number of colleges and also worked at the Obama administration, and just get a little bit of context of how he sees this issue and connection between benefits and college access for students.
Post-secondary education is the pathway to greater and more equitable economic prosperity for all. Everybody needs to have access to it then. If folks have basic needs and security heading into college, then it's a huge barrier for completion. And students sometimes blame themselves. And it's like, no, this is a system. These are systems for generations. No, it's not you, okay? These benefits, it's an important part of a success strategy to access these. And so there's been a lot of progress and there's still a lot of work to be done.
And for the QR code, this is part of a podcast series in Oregon that really lifted up different community college students and centered their experience and how they were able to access benefits, holistic support services, and coaching, and what a difference that made. So feel free to check that out. There's also a link there.
Yep.
And so to think about how to connect students to benefits, how to understand what all the levers are of benefits, I think it's important to start with kind of just a broad scan and thinking about public benefits broadly. So really like looking at what are those intersections of federal funding, so Pell benefits, SNAP benefits, childcare block grants, things of that sort, but also state investments. So what do Head Starts look like in your state? What are emergency funds look like? And then local funding too. And so really thinking about what are those different levers and really trying to intentionally dismantle the status quo of how those are approached and holistically serve students. And one of the things I think after you've kind of scanned what's available, really important to think about this as braided funding and program design in a seamless manner. So the image on the left is frequently what I found working at the colleges, what I heard from students, what I heard from different individuals on my team is that there'd be different resources, different benefits available, but for students, particularly for students with low incomes, for Black, Indigenous, and students of color, for parenting students, for immigrants, for justice impacted students, the image on the left was how our system was experienced frequently by them. And so we would give a list of all these resources and hope people could navigate through, or we could potentially send people to 7 different offices on campus. And so really thinking of shifting and redesigning how that works, because this is particularly challenging for adult students who are balancing complex lives, who are frequently working, or caregiving. And so really thinking about when we are integrating and connecting students to public benefits and other resources as part of our college work, that it is seamless and more like the image on the right, so that it's woven together in a simple and way for students to navigate. And so to start with that is really starting and centering students. So I think one of the things I've heard a couple people talk about today, just not assuming we know what students need or what adult learners need. Certainly there's a lot of data and research, but it's really important to ask students. So thinking about how can you seek input from students, and especially those students we are aiming, or you are aiming to serve in a different capacity. And so how to have students involved in designing the solutions, how to have students give you frank feedback on what it's like to onboard, how to have students give suggestions on outreach strategies, and really understand those might be different. And I think part of it is also being really intentional about engaging with students who may be part-time, who may be evening students, who are parenting students, who aren't necessarily on student government or engaged full-time and might have more capacity to experience this, to offer feedback. We were able to do this at Portland Community College and got some really, really helpful feedback from students in terms of what they needed. And you know, that's going to look different community to community. And so really looking intentionally about how you can do that. And being open to hearing what we're not doing well. I think sometimes there's a tendency to lift up success stories. That's certainly necessary for fundraising, certainly grants do that. And so really looking at how can we really dig into what's not working and how can we get input from those students who aren't on campuses, who did stop out without getting a credential or degree. And so this is a student also from that same All In Student Pathways Forward podcast who started out as a GED student, was an immigrant, experienced homelessness, was working and trying to navigate school and support his family, and really became involved in advocacy. So I'd really encourage you to check out this episode to hear his whole story. But this, I think, just highlights an important element of centering student needs.
College student homelessness is an issue. Housing insecurity is an issue and can severely impact students' academic progress, students' GPA, students' ability to turn in assignments on time. When you are worried about where you're going to sleep tonight or what's going to happen to you tomorrow, you are preoccupied with that to a degree that block you from actually paying attention to your classes. The advice that I would give is to strengthen the trust between students and teachers, so then students are capable of actually relaying to their teachers the challenges that they are facing, more particularly with housing insecurity, and ultimately be able to get the support and the help that they need. You know, the success of our students will reflect positively from all directions on the teachers and their abilities to work with students who are more particularly in need.
And I think Baker just does a really great job of really highlighting the power of having those connections, creating a sense of belonging, creating a sense of trust, and really recognizing that there need to be systemic solutions and policy solutions to the challenges that students face so that they can focus on learning and their goals in the classroom. And so one of the things to start with as well in kind of identifying where there are opportunities to center the needs of students, to connect them with benefits, with more resources, is really looking at the ecosystem of partnerships in your community, and which community colleges are really well poised to do, frequently already have them, but really considering how can you identify the different resources, the different social and political capital investments that different partners in the community have access to. So it could be that you have a CBO that is really trusted in the community, that has really effective holistic wraparound supports. How can you partner in a grant around that? And they focus on the holistic case management that might be needed outside of the classroom. And then the college focuses on some of the academic navigation. Department of Human Services is a partner, state agencies or local agencies that increasingly colleges are partnering with, and really important in considering all the different public benefits that flow through Department of Human Services. Also philanthropy. So it's ECMC as one example of a really great partner who's been investing in this work. There's lots of local foundations, but really helping them to also understand what's needed to create access to college, to support retention and completion, and to connect to careers in those jobs that offer economic mobility. And then also employers, really making sure that they understand that, that they have a responsibility to also be part of the solution. And now is a really great point in time to push on that, but really that they can also invest in their workers, both who are current workers and future workers. And that can be paying for scholarships, recognizing childcare as an issue, recognizing transportation challenges, allowing students time during their work schedule to take classes. And so the whole plethora thing, workforce partners, certainly any of those available through the American Job Centers. And so really kind of seeing where these partnerships lie. Frequently, there's areas of the college that like workforce divisions or adult ed that are very actively involved in these partnerships. So it doesn't mean that every division needs to reinvent the wheel, but really figuring out how to thread that throughout the college's approach to the work. And then the other piece, kind of thinking about before we dive into the individual benefits for students, are some of these kind of programmatic levers where you actually could carve out some supportive services or funding for students. They can fund both the program and potentially sometimes the staffing that goes with it, but also could potentially fund supports for students. So the Strengthening Community Colleges grant, which is a spinoff from the Trade Act, I can't remember the acronym right now, but the TACT grant, that was a good evolution in that there was support services are allowable this time. And when I say support services, that's funding for students that pays for things beyond, typically beyond tuition and fees. So it could be books or tools or childcare or transportation, interview clothing, things of that sort. Certainly in state funds, I think looking at all of the lessons learned from the HERF funding of the Higher Education Emergency Relief Funds, really looking at that flexibility and the powerful impact that had on students. How could elements of that learning be replicated? Childcare block grants are certainly some states that use those and allow students slots in those subsidized childcare block grants. That's a really great conversation to have with your state agency. And then some students do have access if they are working a certain set number of hours. So just really understanding kind of where these different pieces are. The TANF block grant, which stands for Temporary Assistance to Needy Families, is what the funding that actually pays for TANF benefits, formerly known as welfare. But that's also a huge block of funding that can be used for other services to support low-income individuals and families. So in some states, they're using some of that for actually some of their state tuition assistance funding for students. They're using some of it for adult education in other states. In Arkansas, they have a really robust career pathways model that offers those stackable credentials aimed at the needs of adults along with holistic coaching. So that's another just funding lever to consider on a scale to support the programs that are needed. And then in terms of actual benefit access for students, here is a whole list, and it really is like a whole other world of acronyms, but I think it's one of those things that's really important to have staff and faculty leaders on college campuses who dive into this and help demystify it. Because if we're confused by it, if college staff are confused by it, certainly students are. And there's also the opportunity with this to tap into all the expertise of students on campus who are already navigating these benefits and have them help demystify and connect students to these benefits. So you have things like SNAP, which are the food stamp supplemental nutrition assistance program. There's an earned income tax credit, which is a huge can be a huge source of funding for, especially for parenting students. And that is frequently very much untapped. And students especially don't know they can potentially qualify for that if they file taxes. Childcare subsidies, certainly through Head Start or other block grant funding, programs on campus, C-Campus, things of that sort. So really thinking broadly about all these public benefits that can be accessible to students. And certainly there's some challenging, can be challenging eligibility criteria, but again, it's really worth it to navigate that and understand how to do it. There are some colleges or states that are implementing benefits screening tools or platforms like Single Stop that can help. There's technology that can help. And again, that peer navigator model can work. There's also some states that have been willing to have Department of Human Services staff stationed on campus to help connect individuals. So maybe they are at the food pantry one day a week, and that they can assist students with understanding eligibility criteria and also accessing the benefits. And then the other piece would leave there too is there is federal funding for SNAP outreach and grants there. And so some colleges have paired their food pantry or basic needs and security work with that SNAP outreach. And so as students come on to access the food pantry, if you have a resource center or food pantry, they're also getting information about SNAP and assistance applying. So just really thinking about different levers of how to make this accessible for students. And once students are eligible for SNAP, would highly encourage any of your colleges and states who are not tapping into this to consider becoming a SNAP ENT provider. So SNAP ENT is SNAP Employment and Training. It's kind of the broad program that allows connection to education and support services for individuals. The SNAP 50/50 grant specifically is what many states and colleges have started to leverage. And it essentially functions as a reimbursement grant where providers can be reimbursed for 50% of their expenses that they spend to support SNAP students who are receiving SNAP to achieve education and training and reach their goals. And so one of the amazing elements of this program is you take that reimbursement, that 50% back, and you put it back into the program. And it can fund staffing, it can fund gap tuition, it can fund support services, childcare. And so it functions like hopefully like how a retirement account works, where over time it's like compound interest and it can grow exponentially. It starts small, but can be a really, really flexible and robust funding stream that allows colleges and states to fill in those gaps where other programs don't. And because there's flexibility, you can focus on equity and not equality, which is a really key consideration. Please feel free to reach out to me if you want more information about this, and happy to connect you into some of the technical assistance programs or talk about some of the TA work we are doing in this space too. And so when you think about the why of this, really want to just kind of do a snapshot around how connecting students intentionally to benefits really can close those cost of attendance gaps. Benefits Data Trust just put out a toolkit for colleges on how to use data to do informed outreach. There's also been a lot of really great work and research starting in states about kind of how to do nudges for students. But this chart on the right was using averages in the state of Oregon when we were promoting this work of really what connecting students to SNAP ENT and then EITC could look like for students. And it really did close the gap. Benefit Data Trust found that for students that an unmarried student without a child, it could boost $8,500 in benefits. So similar there. And for an unmarried student with one child, it could be at another $15,000 in benefits. So it's really important. And here's the value add for students is this can sometimes make the difference, whether they enroll, whether they drop out. And thinking of this broadly about benefit access and specifically around SNAP is really thinking of this as both, currently the image on the left is really our reality. Benefits Data Trust also found that there's around 2 million students out of 3.3 likely eligible students who are not accessing SNAP. So we have this really small overlap on the left, and we want to move more to the right where there's a greater amount of adults who are eligible for SNAP accessing it and college students. And it can be both a retention strategy and an enrollment strategy. And part of a key consideration with this work is we've talked a lot about the actual benefits and those different resources that are available, but it's equally important, we heard from students, to really have someone who could help them access and navigate the system. And so whether it was a coach or a navigator or an advisor or a peer navigator, really having someone available to do that. Oregon passed House Bill 2835 that funded a benefit navigator. Oregon and Washington and Indiana are following suit. So really would encourage you to find ways to pilot this and then potentially try to scale through policy and state investments. And then the other consideration that's really important is also looking at student-centered designs. So one of the key things again, centering students, finding out what they need, is really being cognizant of all of the stereotypes and stigmas that are surrounding public benefit access that have been very racialized and are racist and sexist frequently, and being very explicit about addressing those and trying to dismantle them. And so one of the things, the framing we used a lot is, just like Pell benefits can help students pay for tuition and fees, SNAP can help students pay for food while they achieve their education and career goals. So really thinking about how to do that in a meaningful way. And then the last thing I want to kind of leave on before we have a chance for a few minutes for questions is really looking at how to get involved, and really how important it is for practitioners and those who are doing the work and students to have a voice in shaping the solutions. So the Farm Bill, which will impact SNAP, is up for reauthorization. WIOA is, TANF. There's also a lot of infrastructure and digital equity investments coming down, unspent ARPA funds, and then housing. And one of the kind of last pieces too, which there should be information going out in your states, is today is the official end of the public health emergency, which changes SNAP rules and exemptions for students. So I put a link in here. If you just Google FNS student eligibility, there's shifts around how students can qualify for SNAP. So really important to stay apprised of that. And so would love to continue the conversation and stay involved, and hear from you what you're doing, and also if you want to be involved. So there is my contact information and more information about NSC. And Julia, I don't know if I can look in the chat if there's any questions, or if anyone wants to come off mute and ask any. Okay, there's no questions in the chat. So I guess the other thing I do want to share is that it really is important right now with the Farm Bill and different conversations that are occurring around work requirements to help educate policymakers about what the needs of students are, to highlight that most individuals who are accessing these benefits and can work, do work. And really remind individuals that the goal is to get people into education and career pathways so that they can earn family sustaining wages. So I think however you can get involved in that, or please reach out if you're willing to, would just want to encourage that right now, as there's increasing pushback federally and in many states for these public benefits that can be key for students. And so with that, I think we can end the session. I believe any guidance from HD of what we want people to go do?